Committee members, it is the hour, 11 o'clock. I call the meeting to order. The clerk has advised me, one, there's nobody required to be sound tested because all the witnesses are with us in the room, as well as all committee members are appearing in person. So welcome to meeting number 123 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the status of persons with disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, but today everybody is appearing in the room. I would like to advise committee members as well as witnesses a couple of points. Please follow the instructions on keeping your earpiece away from the mic. When it's plugged in and you're not using it. If it's not plugged in, it's fine. Because this can create popping that can damage the hearing of the translators as well. Please refrain from tapping the boom of the mic. Again, it can cause popping on the sound system that is harmful to the translators. As well, as always, today's meeting is taking place and you can use the official language of your choice. In the room, interpretation services are available through your earpiece. For those appearing virtually, you would click on the globe icon at the bottom of your surface. If there is a interruption in translation services, please get my attention. We'll suspend while they are being corrected. For those in the room, please wait until I call you by name before you speak. If you need to get my attention, raise your hand and I will recognize you. Wait until I recognize you. So today, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, February 26, 2024, the committee commences its study of compensation disparities between unionized and non-unionized workers in Canada. In this hour, we have two witnesses, Isabelle Marchand, Director, Centre for Labour Market Information. Welcome, Madame Marchand. As well as José Bégin, Assistant Chief Statistician, Social Health and Labor Statistics Field. I believe both are giving an opening statement of up to 5. No, just one. Okay, so whichever one is giving your opening statement, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Okay. Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you for inviting us to this meeting that is part of a study on the compensation disparities between unionized and non-unionized workers in Canada. Statistique Canada dispose de plusieurs.
Stats Canada has a variety of sources of data to give you a complete overview of the labour market in Canada. According to the data that I'm going to cite today is drawn from the most recent labour force survey from the month of August, and it deals with some 68,000 households, information on those who are unionized and non-unionized who are part of the household. To give you an idea of the context, for August 2024, 30%, that is to say 3 out of 10 Canadians who were employed were members of a union or covered by a collective agreement. That represents a minor drop with respect to 1997's review, where the question was introduced into the survey. At that time, 34% of employees in Canada were covered by a collective agreement.
Part of a union in August 2024 earned $37.26 per hour on average, which is higher than the average of $34.30 per hour for employees who were not part of a union. In other words, the union wage premium was about $3 higher according to the latest data, or 9% higher on average per hour. The difference between union and non-union wages has decreased over the years. In 1997, unionized employees earned 31% more on average than employees who were not in a union. This difference had fallen to 20% by 2017 and was 10% in 2023. This is in part because wages of non-unionized workers have grown faster than that of unionized workers in recent years. For example, from January 2020, before the COVID-19 pandemic, to August 2024, wages rose 15% for employees who were part of a union, but rose 25% for non-unionized employees. This recent wage growth among non-unionized employees was most notable in a number of high-paying industries like professional, scientific, and technical services. The average hourly wage in this industry was just under $48 in August 2024, 9% higher than a year earlier, and 32% higher than in January 2020. This industry has one of the lowest rates of unionization at 4%. Overall, union employees were less likely to have wages in the bottom or top of the wage distribution, and rather have wages closer to the middle of the wage distribution. For example, compared with union workers, non-unionized employees were more likely to be in the top 10% of the wage distribution, so 11% compared to 8% of union workers, but also more likely to be in the bottom 25% of the wage distribution, 31% versus 11%. Union workers are also more likely to have a registered pension plan. According to the latest data from Statistics Canada's Survey of Financial Security, 80% of union workers had a registered pension plan, compared with 23% of non-unionized employees. Union workers were also more likely than non-unionized employees to have a disability insurance, 77% versus 48% in 2023, and to have access to other workplace benefits such as maternity and parental benefits, supplementary medical and dental care benefits, sick leave, and vacation leave. The higher wages and the greater workplace benefits for unionized workers can in part reflect differences in individual, job, workplace, and industry characteristics. For example, union jobs are more typically held by core-age workers with full-time positions, which tend to pay more, regardless of union status. On the other hand, youth and those working part-time in jobs with low wages in industries such as food services or retail trade are less likely to be unionized. Indicators related to job quality point to other potential benefits of being in a union. For example, according to the latest data available, union workers were less likely to report that they might lose their job in the near future, so 6% versus 9%, or more likely to report having been offered the possibility of taking training through their employer, so 35% versus 27%. And Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement, and my colleague Isabelle and I would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Merci, Madame Bégin.
Thank you, Ms. Bégin.
At this time, before we begin, welcome Mr. Zimmer to the committee, Madame Gill. Before we begin, we will begin with Mr. Seebeck for 6 minutes. Mr. Seebeck, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your information and data. I love data, so I'm really excited to ask some questions to see if I can parse some more numbers, or if you've done some more number parsing on this. So I firmly believe that unions make good jobs great. And I watched it happen when my son worked in a non-unionized environment in the construction industry, and then he moved into where he's in a union, and his wages went up, his treatment went up, safety on the job went up, everything a father could ask for. My concern is that we have seen significant declines in certain parts of Canada in unionization rates, and I wonder if we could try and peel the onion a little bit on that. So, for example, I look at British Columbia, and I've got a chart which, in 1981, the unionization rate was 43%, and it's now in 2022, it's 28%. And when I look at things like, since 2018, there have been 9,000 job losses in the forestry sector in BC. Virtually all of those would be unionized jobs. All of it as a result of the government's failure to get the softwood lumber dispute resolved. Do you have any data to track by sector the loss of union jobs? Because to me, it looks like when you look at British Columbia, a huge amount of these job losses and unionization is as a result of the loss of jobs in that industry.
Merci, Président.
Thank you very much for your question. In terms of sources of information that we have, as was mentioned previously, the main source is the labor force survey, which gives us an insight into 68,000 households. And then we break it down into unionized and non-unionized employees, and that gives us a more detailed picture of the labor force in terms of certain characteristics. For example, the sector of the industry and the profession of those people, age, gender, and also certain segments of the population, like those living with a disability. So it is possible for us on a provincial basis to provide statistics as to the number of employees and also different statistics related to the labor force.
To the committee, how many unionized jobs have been lost in British Columbia over the last 10 years in the forestry sector? Is it possible, if you go through all the layers of the data you collect, you could provide that to the committee? Or could you try to do it?
For sure, Mr. Chair, we could provide detailed information, a table with some of the elements that Isabelle mentioned, and it will be in terms of the jobs. So every month we're counting jobs, not necessarily a comparison of job loss, but employment level each month.
So how much time do I have?
2 minutes and 10 seconds.
So the other sector I'm really interested in is, for example, the coal sector. So there was supposed to be a just transition for coal workers as a result of the phase out of the use of coal. We know that the Auditor General provided a report that showed there was absolutely no just transition for coal workers. Do you have any, or can you provide us with some data on what happened to coal workers? Because according to the government's own report from the Auditor General, there was sort of no real similar alternative employment that was offered. So the coal worker went from a good union-paying job with a pension and benefits to often working, for example, at Walmart, which is, to me, is an absolute tragedy. So would you be able to parse the numbers on coal workers, for example, the loss of good-paying unionized jobs and where they went?
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. We'd have to do some kind of longitudinal analysis. So what I would like to propose is that if we could if we could come back with an answer to your question as whether or not we are able to do that. We'd have to be able to identify those sectors in that industry and then see throughout our sources of information if we can find them later and in which industry they've been associated. And I'm not sure that we have that, that capacity to do that, but we can look into it for sure and come back to you with an answer.
I'm fine.
You're
Thank
fine?
you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Seebeck. Mr. Long for 5 minutes.
Thank
Or
you, Chair.
6 minutes, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to my colleagues, and thank you to the witnesses this morning. And it's great to hear MP Seebeck's support for unions. I think that's very, very encouraging and refreshing. The purpose of the study for me, when I put it forward, was just to go back. When I grew up, my dad worked for a company. It was called Murray and Gregory in St. John. It was a lumber woodworking company. And, you know, my brother and sister, obviously, we had a family. We had 3 kids, or my mom and dad had 3 kids. And we grew up, I would say, probably, you know, lower middle class in West St. John. And kind of as I got older and older, I realized that my dad never had a health plan. He never had a pension plan. He didn't have anything compared to, you know, a lot of his friends that were in similar industries. And in fact, he made well below what they made. So, you know, I kind of grew up in a non-union environment, but recognizing the value that union jobs had and the value they could bring to families and how they could kind of set the bar for wages. So I think my first question, and actually Mr. Seebeck kind of talked about the union percent drop across the country and what that would do with wages, but I want to change it just to access to paid sick leave. And I know that there was a study in 2023, it was the University of Regina, found that workers with union coverage were more likely to have paid sick leave, 80% compared to 55%, for workers without union coverage, which I don't think is a surprise, really, sadly, to many of us. In workplace pensions, 82% compared to 37%, which is just stunning to me. So, Ms. Bégin, thanks for your testimony, but can you just talk about what extent is Stats Canada data on unionized and benefits publicly available, and are there plans to release further data in this area?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. In terms of access to benefits, with the labor force survey, we inquire to see whether or not they have access to various benefits. For example, vacation leave, maternity leave, disability insurance paid leave, sick leave, paid sick leave. So there is a certain amount, a certain level of detail that is available. According to the stats that we have in terms of access, unionized members have a higher rate of access to benefits than those who are not unionized. But as was said in the opening remarks, in the disability insurance, it's about 40% for uninsured employees. So there's also the factor of geography, but by looking into a more detailed look at the population, we will be able to give you statistics.
On the impact of unionization on benefits across different industries?
If we look at industry, and if we look at the latest data and we look at the union coverage rate, we'll see, for example, that we find the lowest union coverage rate in agriculture, professional, scientific, and technical services, as well as accommodation and food services. If we look at the highest union coverage rate, we'll find them in industry, like namely public administration, educational services, healthcare, and social assistance. So there's the ability to provide information about the union coverage rate, as well as the union wage premium. And it's data that has been collected since 1997. So depending on the request, it might look possible.
Thank you. Another question. Ms. Bégin, you talked in your presentation about the discrepancy of union wages or the hourly wages, between workers that work for a union versus non-union workers. Can you just expand on that again, just for the record? I didn't get it all, what you said. Like the difference and how has it evolved over time, et cetera?
So, Mr. Chair, would you like me to just repeat some of my paragraphs in my opening statement so that it's clear?
Just that.
Or is there a specific question?
That's not for me to determine. You can choose to answer, and if the questioner does not like your answer, they will question you again and clarify.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Thank you for your guidance.
okay.
So maybe I can add a little bit and go back to what we said earlier, where we know that employees who were part of a union in August 2024, so this is the latest data that we have available, they earned on average $37.26 per hour, and this is higher than the average of $34.30 per hour for employees who were not part of a union. So about $3 more in terms of wage premium.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Madame Gill. Madame Gill, pour 6 minutes.
6 minutes, Ms. Gill. Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to Ms. Marchand and Ms. Bégin. First of all, the demonstration is very evident in terms of the disparity between unionized and non-unionized worker. It's very clear there's an enormous difference, and you've illustrated that in your remarks. Colleagues have talked about the drop in unionization. According to the information that I have, there is a variation between the private sector and the public sector, but generally speaking, the rate of unionization is relatively stable. Can you tell me what exactly is the situation? Of course, it depends on the scale that you're using. If you're using a 5-year, 10-year, or 15-year scale, the results may be different.
C'est la question.
Puis, excusez,
I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the question. You made a reference to the rate of unionization between the private sector and the public sector. Well, is there a transfer between the two sectors? I just really want to know what the proportion of workers is, if you can give it to us, with respect to the rate of unionization. I will share a few stats with you, and we will see whether or not that really answers your question. What we've observed currently is that there is an opening for the public service between 25% and 15%, and there are salaries that are higher in the public sector, but I don't have figures with me. These are things that we could look at further for you for reference and try to disaggregate them if you like. Thank you very much. There's a good rate of unionization. It's relatively stable. But I do have a question with respect to the meaning, and I know meaning can vary. Here we look at the analyses, we use them, and the understanding of the meaning can vary. When you play with these figures, have you made any findings? Are you able to be in a position where you can support unionization? Are there elements that would lead you to say C-58 was passed and therefore it dealt with the strike breakers? Can you tell us, because there is an area where we cannot see because we are close to the issue, can you perhaps give us some information? Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for the question. From the perspective of Statistics Canada, what we are asked to do is to gather information on the Canadian economy and the Canadian population. And that information is made accessible to everyone, and that can inform your decision-making and policies as well. My colleague has mentioned something, and I have to say it's important to be able to look at the statistics, to be able to disaggregate them. If you have comments to make here in committee with respect to certain population groups, certain tranches of certain segments of the population, or anything like that, we can look at it to help you draw your conclusions as a committee. Well, thank you for directing us towards disaggregation. But thinking about this, you know, we want a fairness in terms of law and a fairness where it should be, or the possibility of restoring fairness where it is not. So, in a word, is there anything that you can do to help us look at stats objectively, say with respect to unionization or with respect to the division between men and women? It would also add to what Ms. Bégin has said, that I have the word in English highlights that only comes to my mind. That's terrible because I'm in the block. However, anything you can do to help would be appreciated.
Donc, Monsieur le Président, je peux répondre.
Chair, I could answer the question. I can give you some highlights in a new summary, and if ever you need more information, we would be very happy to come back to you with more information. But we know that women, 32% of women are going to be unionized compared to 27% of male workers. And since 2008, we have observed a trend where women will occupy a profession where they will be more easily unionized than men. I'm translating as I'm speaking to you. So according to these recent data, the difference in terms of wages, unionized or not, is more significant for women than for men. That for women, it is 16% more in comparison with those who are non-unionized, and it's 24% for men. Thank you so much, Ms. Gill. And Madame Bégin.
For 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to thank my colleague from the Bloc, Madame Gill, for asking those questions around women and disaggregated. It's definitely very important that we look at these groups separately. And I'm happy to see that persons with disabilities are also protected under unions, have better wages. Mr. Chair, I have a motion I want to bring to the table right now. And I'll start by saying that since Parliament rose for the summer, above guideline rent increases continued in Canada. In addition, we've learned that Dream Unlimited, one of the largest corporate landlords, has admitted to using a software that the United States Department of Justice claims is used for illegal price fixing between landlords. We have also learned that this software is common amongst Canada's corporate landlords. Canadians deserve to know if their landlords are colluding on rent hikes to increase profits for investors and pension funds at their expense. We know that the Public Service Pension Investments, a Canadian Crown corporation, has partnered up with one of these corporate landlords, Starlight Investments, to drive up corporate profits while kicking out the very tenants their pension is supposed to protect. This is happening at 71, 75, and 79 Thorncliffe Park in Toronto. Yet the Liberals gave Starlight Investments twice a free pass not to appear here before this committee. This government continues to protect the richest corporations and throw Canadians on the street. So I'll move the motion that I put on notice last week, that given that while families are increasingly making hard choices about paying rent or keeping food on the table, corporate landlords have been buying up previously affordable apartments and raising rents to increase profits for investors. One of Canada's largest corporate landlords, Dream Unlimited, has admitted to using AI software that the U.S. government has alleged allows landlords to illegally coordinate rent increases and that the software is commonly used in Canada. Today, the biggest real estate investment firms collectively own close to 20% of the purpose-built rental units in Canada. The Public Sector Pension Investment Board, also known as PSP Investments, has significant investments in multifamily housing in partnership with Starlight Investments. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities undertake a study of the role of financialized landlords on rising costs in Canada's rental market, including how the use of algorithmic pricing tools is contributing to rent increases and how persuasive this practice is across the Canadian rental market. That the committee invite President of Dream Unlimited, Michael J. Cooper, CEO of Starlight Investments, Daniel Drimmer, CEO of Boardwalk REIT, Sam Colias, CEO of Main Street Equity, Bob Dillon, CEO of Canadian Apartment Properties Real Estate Investment Trust, Carpreet, Mark Kenny, President and CEO of PSP Investments, Deborah K. Orida, the Commissioner of Competition and other experts and stakeholders, and that the committee hold a minimum of 4 meetings and report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that the government table a comprehensive response to the report. And Mr. Chair, people...
Just a moment. Thank you, Madame Zarrillo. Just for the committee members, witness, Madame Zarrillo has moved a motion, which is in order, and it was it's her prerogative to do that in her time. So now I will pursue with the motion. Madame Zarrillo, do you want to?
Yeah, I just have a very short wrap up here. So people in my community are continuing to be squeezed by their rent while their rental homes fall into disrepair and are lost to corporate landlords. And I know every member of this committee has heard similar stories in their communities. Canadians have had enough of this corporate gouging, and I encourage my colleagues to support this motion so we can hold the actions of these poor corporations to account for Canadians.
Thank you, Madame Zarrillo. As I indicated, the motion is in order. It is now moved on the floor. In the discussion, I have Mr. Fragas-Catos on the motion of Madame Zarrillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have witnesses here that have taken time from their busy schedule representing workers, have come here to inform policy on federal policy on unions and workers. And I've enjoyed listening to them so far. Obviously, members around the table, most members around the table have been prepared to ask them questions. I think that should continue. And with that, Mr. Chair, before I say that, actually, Ms. Zarrillo may know that the issue is being looked at the Finance Committee as well. So it's not to say that the matters that she's raising are not being examined. They are at the Finance Committee, where they've been given a lot of attention, and I'm sure that will continue. So with that, Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn debate on the motion.
We have a motion to to adjourn debate on the motion currently before. So with that, I have to go directly to a vote, a recorded vote on the motion to adjourn of Mr. Fragascatos.
On the motion to adjourn debate, Mr. Fragascatos,
Yes.
Mr. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Collins, yes. Mr. Coteau, yes. Mr. Van Bynen,
Yes.
Ms. Gray,
Yes.
Ms. Falk,
Yes.
Mr. Seaback,
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer,
Yes.
Madame Chabot,
Contre.
Ms. Zerillo.
No.
The motion has been accepted. With that, the debate is adjourned. And Madame Zerillo, you're out of your time. So now we'll move on to Ms. Gray for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. A recent report that you put out cited highest inflation rate in 40 years takes an outsized bite out of annual wages and salaries in 2022. And it showed how most wages in most sectors were down with inflation-adjusted median annual wages by industry, meaning people's paychecks didn't go as far. So the industries down the most included manufacturing, education services, public administration, transportation, and warehousing, most of which would presumably be unionized jobs. So my question is, have you broken down that report, or do you have another report which looks at inflation-adjusted median annual wages by unionized versus non-unionized sectors or positions? Or if you don't have, is that something that you could table for this committee, whether you have that report now or it's something that you could put together? Is that something that you could table for this committee?
C'est quelque chose qu'on peut regarder.
Yes, we can look at it. That's something we can look at.
Liberal ideology and policy supported by the NDP has led to union workers losing their jobs, including in forestry, energy, and fisheries. And reports show about 9,000 jobs were lost in forestry in British Columbia between 2018 and 2023. And in 2019, the Tolko mill in Kelowna, in my region, permanently closed with 217 permanent good-paying jobs gone. And there were 2 more sawmill closures in BC just announced, which will be 500 job losses. And my colleague, MP Zimmer, is in the room here today. It's in his region. And it cited U.S. tariffs as a primary reason. Now, union forestry workers were better served by the Harper government, which completed a softwood lumber agreement within 3 months of taking office and signed an extension which expired in 2015. And 3 U.S. administrations and 9 years later, this Liberal government has completely failed to secure a softwood lumber agreement with the United States. When there are layoffs, governments talk about retraining. And so my question is, have you done analysis on the retraining or reskilling of workers who have lost their job in the forestry sector, and if the new positions are comparable, including if previously unionized positions are unionized in their new positions, and if compensation such as wages and benefits were the same?
Mr. President, thank you for the question. So I'll start to say by saying we have some information about the quality of employment. For example, access to skills development and training that are part of the labor force survey and can, for which we can provide some statistic. In terms of, and if I understand correctly, and it's something we can look into, the retraining of specific worker and how it has affected directly their employment before and after I'm not sure we'd have this information, but it's something we
Okay.
can look at.
Thank you very much.
Look
If you
into.
could look at what my, go back and look at what my question was, and if that's something, if you haven't done that analysis, if that's something that you could do and then table for this committee, that would be much appreciated. My next thing that I want to move on to is the Minister of Natural Resources Just Transition Plan from September 20, 2022 on page 68 estimated the Liberal government's Just Transition would lead to the elimination of 2.7 million jobs in sectors like agriculture, energy, manufacturing, construction, and transportation. And I've heard this uncertainty is incredibly stressful for workers. So my question is, have you broken down these expected job losses for what is currently unionized versus non-unionized and done a comparison what the reskilled or upskilled positions would be? And if I could add as well, if the compensation, such as wages and benefits, would be the same. And I'm running out of time here, so if you haven't done that analysis, I'm wondering if that's something that you could do and also table for this committee if that hasn't been done yet.
So, Mr. Chair, we haven't done that analysis. We can look to see if it's feasible given the data sources that we have in sample size as well, but we can look into it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Gray, your time is up, but if the witnesses, you have her question and could analyze, provide back written to the committee, it would be appreciated. Mr. Coteau for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. You know, I think that organized labor and unions in general have a very significant role to play in the future of this country when it comes to our workforce, especially with the changes that are taking place in our country with technology, an ever-changing workforce, and the protection of workers overall. You know, my mother was, she cleaned dishes at a children's hospital, and they brought in contract workers, and they formed a union. She was one of the organizers there. And it was a perfect example of when people get organized to protect their jobs and to look for ways to better position the people who really make that, you know, that institution, that hospital, or the workplace successful. So, you know, the data that you provided today, I thought was very good data. We saw the difference in pay, the difference with benefits, you know, insurance, just better supports for workers. And thank you for collecting that data. We know that, you know, because of organized labor in this country, we've seen higher wages, improved working conditions, better benefits and job security, and even, you know, vacation days to better support families. You know, it wasn't long ago when the Conservatives, just a decade ago, the Conservatives in this country put in right-to-work legislation. There were a couple of bills they put in place, 377 and 525. And these bills specifically targeted unions. And in 2014, the legislation that the Harper government put in made it difficult for unions to certify. They looked for ways strategically to actually stop the growth of unions in this country. And I think that it is important for Canadians to know that we need to look for ways to ensure that there are workforces where those barriers are removed, where people can organize and they can present a case to for better placement of workers in that workforce. One of the questions I wanted to ask, you know, the statistics you provided were very detailed, and I know that there were some questions around gender, but do you do any disaggregated data based on race?
Thank you for the question. We have multiple sources of information where we collect information around population groups. In the past, also known as visible minorities. The census of population being one of those sources. And with the census, we can go to a very low level of geography. On the labor force survey, as Isabelle mentioned earlier, we collect various information, including population groups. So since the summer of 2020, since the beginning of the pandemic, we have been able to report key labor market indicators disaggregated by population groups.
So could you tell, like perhaps you don't have the information with you now, but Could you tell this committee specifically how many people of African descent actually, percentage-wise, are part of unions? Is that a possibility to get that type of breakdown?
For the example you provided, we would have the data source as the census. The labor force survey will provide information about the racialized group. The statistic can be disaggregated, for example, by Black, Chinese, South Asian, etc. A predefined number of group that origin from predefined number of groups.
So I'd like to request through you, Mr. Chair, if there's any of that type of information that can be provided to, that you think may be of value to this committee, broken down between, I would also request people based on gender, other categories, disability, and also race if possible, and region. Yeah, thank you so much. I think I'm done, Mr. Chair.
You got 14 seconds. Are you going to
I'll-
cede it?
I'll take the 14 seconds and say thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Coteau. I believe the witnesses were clear on what you had requested to report back. So thank you. We will now go to, where are my notes? No. Madame Chabot.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Hello. Good morning, Chair, and good morning to our witnesses. I'm so happy that you are here with us. It's possible that I might ask questions that have already been asked, but nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead with them. Before I came into politics, I was a union leader, and as Mr. Long mentioned, I did have some reserves, and not with respect to the substance of unions playing a major role in areas like Quebec and elsewhere. In other words, what I'm saying is it's very well known that there are benefits to unionization in terms of remuneration, benefits, and social protection. You can't deny it. I would like to say that the study that has been mentioned sheds light on what, well, it was the Conservatives who did that in the past, the two studies that Mr. Coteau just talked about. But even though the right to unionization is important, it plays an important role, the possibility of suppressing the right to associate and the right to organize it can always be there. But nonetheless, with strike breakers, it is always a possibility or a threat. I hope I'm not saying the same thing as what has been said earlier, but Quebec has had one of the highest rates of unionization in Canada. And the public service is very well organized. There's a high rate of unionization. But there were figures that indicated that in the private sector, the rate of unionization had diminished, had dropped somewhat. Am I correct in saying that? Or can somebody confirm that there was a drop in the rate of unionization in the private sector? And if that is the case, can you identify what sectors that was in or is in?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. To come back to your first point, with respect to union coverage, Quebec is amongst the two strongest provinces. The first is at 39%, Labrador, Newfoundland, and Quebec is at 29%. So these are the two strongest unionized provinces. But in terms of unionization by public or private sector and per industry. We don't have those figures with us, but we can look at it for you, certainly. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. I was happy to be able to be here.
Your time is up, Madame. Madame Zerillo for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm always hopeful that the data that we collect from Canadians is used for Canadians. So my question relates to how does the government use the data they get from Statistics Canada to improve the lives of Canadian workers? And please share an example of a policy, a government policy that it has informed, and I'm really interested in a focus on equity. So if you think of one where you saw an inequity that needed to be corrected and that the government took that insight and created policy.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. As I said earlier, the mandate of Statistics Canada is really to provide information. So collect information from Canadians, whether it's on businesses or the population, and to provide the information and be accessible to Canadians and to policymakers. So I wouldn't be able to comment on how the data have been used and what kind of impact they may have had on the population
I can understand
group.
that they have to ask you for the data. So you mentioned around the middle of the wage distribution. So I was very interested in this when I was looking at the data. Like, is it mean or is it median? So the average, I understand, that's our mean, but is the median? Because I'm very interested in women and how women are affected by this. The majority of the women below or above, because sometimes those very high ones and those very low ones can be outliers. So this middle of the wage distribution, is that the median?
C'était dans ton opening statement. OK. Donc, les statistiques reliées.
Statistics related to the distribution of these salaries and wages that we cited at the outset in our statement. What we looked at was not the median, but the median is available and we can look at it for you. If we talked about the distribution.
On those wages and by gender, please. And then my last one is in relation to the fact that the government just takes the information you collected. Does the labor survey capture workers who are currently doing unpaid primary care work, caregivers in the home?
So, Mr. Chair, the Labor Force Survey collects information from Canadians around employment. So the main focus of the Labor Force Survey is whether a person is in the labor force, retired, unemployed, how long they've been unemployed. So we would capture everybody, including the fact if they are doing unpaid work. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second point is that we do have sources of information outside of the Labor Force Survey, which provide detailed information around unpaid work in the care economy specifically.
Thank you, Madame Zerillo. A little direction from the committee. We only got a few minutes left in the first hour. Do you wish to adjourn while we transition, or do I go 3 and 3?
3 and
3. Okay. You got it. Whoever wants it.
Great.
Mr. Seebeck?
Yes, thank
3
you.
minutes.
So what I think is interesting on data is to break down into different subsets. So we've seen the decline in unionization rate in general. We got that information. But what I find interesting is the decline in unionization rate in private sector unions versus public sector unions. So the information I was able to see is that from 2015 to 2021, which is the only data I could find, the unionization rate in the private sector declined from 15% to 13.8%. So those are the years that this government has been there. They say they're friendly to unions and labor, but we've actually seen a pretty precipitous decline in the number of union members in the private sector. And that's as a result of loss of jobs in industries like forestry and mining and others. Do you have the numbers of the decline of unionization in the private sector with you, or could you provide that to the committee from, 2015 to as close to the present?
We can provide statistic about. Thank you for the question. We can provide statistics about the trends for private and public sector.
Thank you. Now, I know you're Statistics Canada, but I did a little bit of research myself, and I looked at private sector union wages on average in Canada, which I determined to be about $31.14. If you have a different number, please provide that to the committee. And I don't know if you can do this, but what I did is I looked at what is the private sector average union wage in the United States, and it's actually $41.17. So it is a $10 an hour difference. If you could confirm that, that would be wonderful for the committee. But this goes back to what we've been seeing, this terrible trend in Canada with the decline in per capita GDP. We know there's a huge gap between Canada and the United States, and it looks like this discrepancy is particularly hitting hard in the private unionized sector. Is that something that you'd be able to provide to the committee?
Thank you. Yes, we can provide that information afterwards.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think I got 10 seconds.
You do.
So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Mr. Seebeck. We will conclude this round with Mr. Van Bynen for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some time ago, the Conservative Party eliminated the long-form census. And has the data that we've lost as a result of that influenced your analysis of the information that we're looking at now?
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the information. As I said in my opening statement today, most of the statistics that were cited were coming from the labor force survey and not from the census. I would also like to state that the census long form has been information from the census long form was collected again in 2016 and 2021. It is one of the sources of information we use to provide information around labor market indicators at very fine level of geography. But most of the data that we publish on a regular basis are coming from the Labor Force Survey, which is our flagship survey around employment.
According to the 2022 Statistics Canada article drawing on data from the Survey of Work History and Labor Force Survey, the rate of union membership, as you mentioned earlier, has diminished over the last 4 decades. What factors have contributed to this decline in union membership, and how has the decline in union membership correlated with the trends of earnings and compensation? Or to what extent can a casual relationship be determined?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for your question. An analysis, which would be a good one, taking into account all the external factors that could explain the drop in unionization rate or its impact on revenues, would require an in-depth analysis. Actually, at the present time, we don't have statistics at that level. We do have some that could be disaggregated in the same way, but what it will show would be relations between different factors, but not a cause and effect relationship between specific elements. So you have to see everything in context.
Provide that information to the committee?
C'est quelque chose qu'on devrait.
That's something that we could look at, yes, and get back to the committee.
That is your 3 minutes, Mr. Van Bynen. With that, thank you, witnesses, for attending. That concludes the first hour of this particular study. We'll suspend for 5 minutes to give time to bring our next witness, which are all appearing virtually. So again, witness, thank you for coming, and there was quite a bit of information requested to come back to committee. So we'll follow up on that. With that, committee members will suspend for 5 minutes. Suspend. Members, the clerk has advised me the two witnesses appearing virtually have been sound tested and are approved. With that, we will commence the second hour of this study with Pierre-Antoine Harvey, economist with Centrale des Syndicats de Québec, as well as Courtney Globe, Director of Public Affairs, Fish, Food, and Allied Workers, Unifor. You have Mr. Harvey, you have 5 minutes for an opening statement, then followed by Ms. Globe. Mr. Harvey.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Hello, Chair, and thank you very much to all members of the committee for inviting me to appear. I made a long presentation on paper, which is translated, I'm sure, but I will just quickly, as did Madame Bégin and Madame Marchand, I will try to demonstrate what the impact on wages and benefits is for my group. Our two previous witnesses showed that there was a disadvantage for those people who are unionized, who are not unionized, rather, with respect to those who are unionized. But I'm going to take the opposite side, and I'm going to show that there is a difference, that there is a detriment. I can say that in 1980 it went from 38% to 22% since. That is this wage disparity. But there is also the makeup of the various groups. If you look at the stats since 1987, the largest drop in unionized groups can be found with men. Where there are secondary school requirements or post-secondary school requirements. And if you take a look at the rate of unionization, it is within the private sector where there is a type of labor that is stronger. If you take a look at the difference in salaries, it's in these areas that you're going to find unionization makes the greatest difference. So in the private sector, where there are fewer members versus the public sector, there is less unionization. If you think, for example, the construction or the manufacturing sector, transport or public services, and we also have seen the arrival of a large number of new jobs that are related to unionization in terms of IT, in terms of the financial sector. The advantage that unionization offers, if you take a look at Section 4, there is the more complex reality that you can find. It's not a zero-sum game, as you can see that this does not happen to the detriment of non-entities. Rather, there is an overall effect on all of society. The first reason is the threat of unionization, that non-unionized members may well lose their job if there is unionization. In the United States, there was an instance when GM United Auto Workers signed an agreement of an increase of 33% for unionized workers. In the following weeks, automobile workers obtained a 25% rise, and the UAW was able to do that for them. So through studies, we know that the more unionization there is and the stronger it is, the non-syndicated workers will be able to approach unionized workers' status in terms of remuneration. Something else that is very important for workers, unionized or otherwise, is that, and in particular in the IT sector, they put in place the policies of social justice that would be able to establish a level of equality. So sometimes it's done through policy, through the government, and sometimes otherwise. But the advantage is this. If you look at world studies, you will see that these increases demonstrate both equality and inequality in terms of the two types of workers. The World Bank has published a census on this. Neither those who support or oppose unionization were able to rebut the arguments made by the other side, but it is a very clear that nonetheless there is a significant effect of unionization. There's not an impact necessarily on inflation, on employment, or on productivity levels. The cost of work is increased by unionization. It has been demonstrated in studies, but there are other activities undertaken by unions that will have an effect on businesses, and the security, therefore, of the workers will be of prime importance. There are investments in upgrading skills, and also that there would. Yes.
Merci.
Thank you.
We will begin with Mr. Sieb. No, oh, that's right. Sorry, we have one more witness. Thank you. My screen is not reflecting. Madame Globe, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee today. So I'm here on behalf of the Fish Food and Allied Workers Union, which represents community-based fishery workers throughout our province, encompassing over 13,000 owner-operators, crew members, and seafood processing plant workers. As the largest private sector trade union in our province, our membership also includes Newfoundlanders and Labradorians in marine transportation, metal fabrication, brewing, hospitality, and more. The FFAW is also an affiliate of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector trade union, representing over 300,000 Canadians in every major sector of the economy. Unifor and all unions fight for a more secure future for our members, being a strong voice for equity, safety, and social justice. And the motion put forth by MP Long calls for a comprehensive study on the disparities between unionized and non-unionized workers. This study is not just timely, it's crucial for understanding how we can bridge the gap and ensure fair compensation and continued job security for Canadians. The FFAW is celebrating our 53rd anniversary this year, and the imprint our union has had on the historical fabric of our province cannot be understated. The work our members have done to drive and protect and develop community-based fisheries is renowned and respected by the fishing industry representatives around the world. This is because we continue to be successful in collectively uniting these 13,000 owner-operator harvesters, crew members, and processing plant workers all under one resilient and robust trade union banner. It's a unique model, and it's one that no other province has been able to achieve before corporate concentration and control in those fisheries became too entrenched to reverse. As your study will likely uncover, unions that represent a critical mass of workers in a particular sector, industry, or occupation or geographic area can often influence market wages for all workers. And this has been the case in Newfoundland and Labrador since 1971. Honorable members, most fisheries around Canada and the globe have faced dramatic and devastating corporatization, whereby community-based fisheries are steadily eroded by corporate entities receiving increased access and allocation of wild fisheries. Such corporate concentration, particularly by foreign-owned multinational companies, serves to maximize value for shareholders and not the adjacent communities that rely on them. Without the important work of the FFAW over these decades, the hundreds of rural coastal communities around our province would look much different today. So for our members, the benefits of unionization go far beyond the disparities in compensation. Fish processing companies like Royal Greenland and OCI do not operate with the best interests of workers in mind. They operate with the best interests of their profits in mind. Their primary objective is to eliminate small boat harvesters and use only factory draggers, and eliminating the need to ever land a product in our province, a pound of product in our province. These companies are well known for their use of illegal controlling agreements, whereby they unlawfully assume financial control of inshore licenses, and they are known to suppress local employment in favor of the often abused temporary foreign worker program. Previous DFO ministers have done significant work to put protections into the Federal Fisheries Act to support the preservation of owner-operator fishery and recognize the importance the small boat fishery has to the economic and cultural sustainability of coastal Canada. Unfortunately, the current minister has made decisions contrary to supporting Canadian community-based fisheries. Minister Leboutillier and Newfoundland and Labrador Liberal MPs in the current sitting government have weakened and destabilized unionized workers we represent and have failed to act according to the mandate set forth by the Federal Fisheries Act and relevant policies. Even though the current federal government purports to back Canadian unionized workers, resource management decisions reflect a very different agenda. This year, Minister Leboutillier publicly declared a significant distribution of redfish to the corporate fleets, sabotaging years of collective work on economic diversification and sustainability by the Gulf of St. Lawrence fleet. And the decision is so momentous that enterprises based in Newfoundland, Quebec, and New Brunswick are now expected to go bankrupt in the coming months and years. Minister Leboutilier's reopening of the commercial cod fishery solely for the benefit of domestic and international corporate draggers indicates an agenda to further undermine the sustainability of unionized fishery workers and Canadian community-based fisheries. Moving on to a more general perspective, unionized workers in Canada enjoy significant advantages over their non-unionized counterparts. According to the available data, unionized workers earn more per hour than non-union workers, and for women and young workers, this is even more pronounced. And these differences just are not in numbers. They represent real improvements in quality of life, financial stability, and future security. Unionized workers are more likely to have additional health benefits, pension plans, life and disability insurances, and other protections that contribute to long-term well-being. And one thing we ask your study to reflect are the differences between public and private sector unions. Union density remains high within the public sector, increasing between 2019 and 2023. Which helps explain the maintenance of strong public sector wages and benefits despite examples of legislated wage restraint. Private sector union density, on the other hand, has dropped over the same time period. The continuing decline highlights the need for policies to support private sector unionization, such as single-step card check certification, anti-scab legislation, contract flipping legislation, and particularly relevant for our members, resource management decisions that support working people. So we must do more to reverse this erosion of the middle class. Better understanding of the reasons behind compensation disparities will enable the federal government to formulate policies that promote fairness and equity. And with more robust information, we can better support working Canadians and help more people realize the benefits of unionization. So thank you, members, for your attention to this issue, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ms. Globe. We will now begin with Mr. Seaback for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks very much for your oops, tried to get my for the testimony you've just given. I want to drill down a little bit more into this. So some of the questions I asked Statistics Canada is about the decline in unionized workers in coal and forestry, which we've seen sort of staggering declines as a result of government policy. But now it sounds like there's a risk of these declines coming into the fishing industry and people that you represent, again, as a result of government decisions. So with this recent decision that you described, how many jobs do you think could end up being lost, good union-paying jobs?
So in Newfoundland and Labrador alone, there's approximately 20,000 or so fisheries workers. And these jobs support more than just the fishery. So because of the geographic distribution of our province, our coastal rural communities depend on the fishery to support other industries as well. So we saw, effects of this post 1992 cod moratorium, but without the protection of the owner operator and ensuring that, product is landed here, that we have owner operator enterprises that support good jobs. We're looking at, the eradication of our community-based fisheries, but also, the schools and the healthcare centers and all of those spin-off jobs that come from the fishery.
That sounds like this is a devastating decision. Now you contrast that with, you said foreign. I think trawlers are. I'm not an expert on fishing. I apologize, but I mean, how many sort of good-paying union jobs would result from these foreign trawlers coming in and harvesting fish as a result of this decision?
So from my understanding, there's probably a couple hundred people who work on the trawlers, maybe a few dozen from our province, compared to the over 10,000 fish harvesters who work in the owner-operator fishery.
So they're not really going to add any, right? In fact, my understanding is they in often cases, the catch doesn't come to the processing facilities in Newfoundland, which is where your unionized members are. This would be done either on the ship or somewhere else. Is that correct?
Exactly. Most of these draggers are large factory freezer trawlers. They can fish for weeks at a time. They can harvest millions of pounds at once, and they don't have the need to land and process here in the province.
One of the things I talked about in the earlier hour is there was supposed to be a so-called just transition for coal workers when coal was being phased out by the current government. And what the Auditor General actually found is that very few people transitioned into good-paying jobs. Their pensions weren't bridged. There was no system set up to help people move into a comparable job where they'd make comparable salary and benefits. In fact, the exact opposite was seen. You saw a cratering of incomes and other things. When you're talking about the job losses that are going to come as a result of this Liberal government decision to your union members, I mean, what kind of jobs will your members transition to? What will be the economic effect beyond just you losing their job?
So that's one of the challenges we face here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And one thing I think that just transition strategy was sorely lacking was the consideration for our rural coastal communities and the fact that, people can't just fall back on other jobs. Number one, we hardly even have cell phone and internet service in most of our rural areas. So expecting these people to do like a work at home job or something like that is just not feasible. And also maintaining our connection to our culture and our history. Newfoundland and Labrador is known for the fishery. This is why we have such a vibrant tourist industry, because people come here to see this way of life. And, the further erosion of it is going to mean a lot more losses than just the fishery. It's also, like I said, our culture and our way of life and our tourism and everything that we're known for.
And you talked about corporate control that's going to take place as an effect of this. Is that what's going to happen is that the owner-operator that's a member of your union, they're going to potentially, lose their livelihood, go bankrupt, and that's going to be replaced with a corporation, probably a foreign corporation, because it's being opened up to foreign trawlers. What's the effect of that decision look like in that light?
So, the inshore owner-operator fishery is complex, and there are a lot of policies and legislations in place to protect them. But it's well known, through the federal government and through the industry that these companies will look for loopholes. They will look for other ways to work around these policies. Illegal controlling agreements are one. They've already been eroding the share and the ownership of community-based fisheries by trying to take more and more financial control of the licenses. So the erosion has already started to happen on this end. And by allocating future quotas to corporate fleets instead of community-based fisheries, we're preventing this seasonal industry from being able to sustain itself. The struggle in the fishery is always to make sure people are getting enough weeks of work and enough hours a week of work in a year. And by providing more quota allocations to community-based fisheries, we are providing more hours of work, more economic sustainability for these people. And it also makes it more attractive for younger people to look at this industry and say, well, I want to stay in my community. And if I'm going to work in the fishery, it needs to be able to support, myself and my family. So these are things that are really important when we look at resource management decisions.
Yeah, government decisions matter.
Thank you, Mr. Seebeck. We went over a little. Before I move to the next question, I remind committee members again to make sure your devices are on mute and any alarms, because they are significantly amplified through the sound system. We are missing one of our interpreters. So just please be conscious of that. So we'll now move to Mr. Fragiskatos.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Ms. Glode, you talked about at the tail end of your presentation the benefits of unionization. You used that exact phrase. Could you talk about union dues and how they help workers realize those benefits?
Yeah. So, when you're part of an organization and you expect a certain level of service, that's what your dues provide. So we're a unique model, like I said, and the union dues that our fish harvesters provide allows us to offer a number of services. Our members do have a life and death disability insurance included in their membership dues. And they also get all of the servicing that we provide, like helping with EI claims, helping with DFO issues like that. We handle, organizing committees and stuff around the province, supporting resource management decisions. And we also have a lot of involvement in science and research. So these are just the types of services that dues provide to members and the benefits that brings them.
Thank you very much. What are your thoughts, in light of what you just said then, what are your thoughts on so-called right to work laws enacted in some U.S. states, whereby individuals are allowed to opt out of paying union dues?
Well, in principle, our union believes that dues should be mandatory if you are part of the union, because all people in that industry will inherently benefit from the work done by that union. So by allowing people to opt out, you'll inherently be weakening the power of unions and the power of collective action.
I agree with you. Unfortunately, the Conservative Party of Canada's 2023 official policy book on page 6 states the following. The Conservative Party of Canada supports right-to-work legislation to allow optional union membership dues. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, our union would certainly disagree with that and not support that policy.
And it was also interesting, just a few days ago, in fact, the Alberta Federation of Labour made a statement saying that policies like this could lead to a pay cut of almost $2,300 a year. I'm not asking you to agree with their analysis because you haven't looked at the numbers, but does that seem to make sense to you, how they've arrived at that conclusion?
Yeah, it would make sense that you would be reducing the level of service you can provide, whether it's negotiating power, research departments, that sort of thing. If you have less resources, you provide less service.
Sure. Premier Smith in Alberta is moving in this direction as well. This is apparently the policy of her government. Monsieur, thank you very much for that. Monsieur Harvey, je suis certain.
Mr. Harvey, I'm sure that you have an opinion on this subject as well, do you not? Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for the question. The problem of making a union contribution voluntary or not is a great one. I have seen where people have benefited from collective agreements negotiated by the unions, but also they haven't had to pay the price, and that is discouraging for union action. When you have this small minority that it yet has to pay for all the benefits of everyone. But Mr. Poilievre has said there is a right to work. Perhaps that's a play on words here. Well, the right to work in the same way that you cannot escape municipal taxes or provincial taxes on the pretext that you do want to be part of that organization. When there's a choice made to unionize, to organize the workers, it seems illogical to me that there should be the possibility of exemptions, of exceptions for that type of instance. And also, Mr. Harvey, what would be the result if there were this American law applied? Do you have a point of view on that? I haven't made any specific studies on it, but looking at the data and making a comparison where the states have the right to work law and the other states that don't, where unionization and checkoff exist, the right to work stakes, and here I put parentheses, air parentheses around my words, are not as numerous as those who offer, those states who offer better protection for the unionized members. It's particularly weak in sectors where there's the greatest need. For example, in private sector where there's a lot of competition but low wages, and that's where people, the workers, need the most protection.
20 seconds left, Mr. Chair, and I don't doubt the sincerity of colleagues like Mr. Seebeck, who began today by talking about his son's experience. I'm sure that's quite true, and as I say, he's very serious about that. But I bet there's a bit of a contradiction when it comes to the Conservative Party's policy on unions and what exists in practice. Again, their policy book talks about the so-called right to work, which is detrimental to the rights of workers, as we've just heard.
Okay, your time's up. Thank you, Mr. Fragiskatos. Madame Chabot.
Madame Chabot.
Madame Chabot, 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. These exchanges will probably, even though they're not directly connected to the subject, but I have to say it will mean that there is a benefit in that we are able to promote the unionization of the labor movement. It benefits society, but we don't necessarily want people to have the possibility of not participating or not having to be with it there. Mr. Hervé, you spoke and I want to thank you about this. I want to hear what your thought is on the matter before I ask your question. Well, just let me conclude in what I was trying to say. Stats Canada that has demonstrated that there is not a detrimental effect on benefits in Canada when there's a labor movement. It is good for society. It is good for the market, for public policy. And I would say that specifically and especially the impact of unions on business is a good one. It has contributed to the training of the labor force, development of technology in the exchanges that you have between employers and employees in the area of human resources, for example. And I think that unions stimulate and promote savings because they participate in venture capital. The case of Quebec is very interesting in this area, where we have the Fonds de Solidarité de la FTQ. We have these funds where there are tens of thousands, of billions of dollars of venture capital that is invested elsewhere in Canada. Just to conclude my thoughts, In the lowest salaried sectors, in the private sector, in the areas where they do not necessarily require a higher level of education, and in the ones where they do require more, there is an advantage to unionization. I believe you have to promote access to unionization. It should go through discussion at work. There's a Canadian code. Labor relations fall under the provinces, but there can be guidance from the federal government under the Canada Labour Code. And there are some very difficult sectors where you will have to go beyond the Quebec system, the Canadian system, the North American system. What exists in the United States, whereas this system of sectoral unionization, Quebec has something similar, where we could have agreements in different sectors of the economy. In Quebec, we have sectoral collective agreement decrees, and that benefits everybody in a given sector where it is negotiated. And let me think of the example of the high fashion couture industry. And there is also the multi-employer accreditation instance, where you can have a broader bargaining table, which would have a positive effect on, say, housing in the province. In small centers where the employees, say, have very poor working conditions, these type of multi-employer agreements in the private sector have provided a model to make a better working environment for them. Well, my question really tends towards the sectors where there is a majority of women working, sectors where qualifications are perhaps of lesser importance, and where it's like a gig economy. Can you tell me, are women benefited from that, or are they in a difficult position? Well, in small businesses where there are lesser requirements of education, fewer diplomas required, they are perhaps less educated traditionally, and that has drawn women in to those various industries, service industries. But measures could be put in place to promote organization in these areas where women predominate as workers. And in Canada, that is something that requires work. Where the greatest difference can be made, I would say, for both men and for women, flying in the face of history, because men also work in these sectors. Thank you. And thank you, Madame Chabot.
For 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses today. My first question is for Ms. Glaude, and I wanted to thank you for highlighting why we're doing this study, why unions matter, and that offset of the employer. And as we're seeing in an environment of corporate greed growing, how workers' rights are being eroded. So you mentioned about the liberal government weakening local workers' rights in the favor of corporations and corporate greed, quite often international interests rather than interests at home. And that you also introduced the idea of contract flipping and successorship. So I wonder if you could just expand a little bit more on the negative impacts to workers on these contract flipping and the successorship, and why employers are so eager to do it.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. Contract flipping, I can speak about a recent example here in Newfoundland and Labrador. You might be familiar with the mining company Vale. They undertake a lot of work here in the province, and they hire a lot of skilled trade workers. They recently flipped a contract on about 200 skilled trade workers, whereby the contract was retendered to a new company. What that meant was 200 people who had unionized jobs, a strong contract. They were effectively put on the street and said, if you want to come back to work for this new company, you can do that, but you'll be taking a 30% pay cut and losing your benefits. So these are the impacts that contract flipping has on working people. And it's, one thing that, like I said, is really eroding that middle class job, and it's reducing the purchasing power and the economic sustainability of skilled trade workers.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Mr. Harvey, I'm going to ask you also if you have any experience or example that you can share about how contract flipping and successorship is affecting your workers.
Listen, I work for a union that is principally made up of public sector workers, so I really can't answer your question exactly. But from 2000 to 2010, we had a lot of battles about contracting out in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada. The cost of labor was such that very often the employer turned to contracting out. And I think that since then there has been some change, gains have been made with respect to this situation of contracting out. It's very important for all Canadian provinces to have protection against contracting out.
Thank you. And does contracting out and flipping drive down wages? Mr. Harvey, and then I'll ask the same question to Ms. Globe.
The evidence is very clear on that. Flipping a contract and contracting out allows the employer to reduce his costs, and they cut the advantages and wages of workers.
And I'm happy to hear that the doesn't happen so much in the public service. Ms. Globe, would you be able to share?
Yes, so absolutely, contract flipping definitely drives down wages and benefits for especially the middle class in particular in our example.
Ms. Globe, I was involved in a rally around contract flipping for personal support workers. I know that's not necessarily an area that you were talking about today, but I know that for women, it really set them back, these contract flips where they were going back to, and not being able to increase their wage. Is this something that you're seeing also too in your industry, that it's affecting women, racialized minority groups at Unifor?
I can't really speak to that specifically in our example. The contract flips that we've experienced have been predominantly male-dominated industries. Now, we do represent other workplaces, like we represent cleaning companies, and the majority of those contracts or contract workers are women. So it is something that we can be looking at in the future if, Vale again flips the contract to somebody else. So it can certainly, I feel like, affect all people equally.
And Mr. Harvey, do you also have any comments about the gender split and how contract flipping might be affecting gender and marginalized groups?
Pardon.
Sorry, I didn't give any specifics about establishing distinctions between men and women, but very often It is women who are at the lower end. Very often, it's a matter of low income, low wage jobs. It's for people, not only women, but also immigrants and others who are affected by this flipping and contracting out.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Monsieur Harvey.
Mr. Seaback, I believe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just feel like I have to clean up a little bit of misinformation / disinformation that we heard from the Liberal member previously. The Conservative leader's on the record as saying that there will be no legislation with respect to right to work as a Conservative government. Same thing with the Bill 377 that was mentioned by a Liberal member. It's official, it's public, and so I just wanted to clean up the misinformation surrounding that. I want to go back to you, Ms. Glode, and just a couple of questions. Did you speak about your concerns to the Liberal government with respect to the decision on the cod fishery? And if so, what was their response to your pleas that they reconsider this decision and the effect it'll have on your unionized workers?
So unfortunately, the Newfoundland and Labrador Liberal MPs have completely frozen us and our members out since the decision was made. We've been unable to discuss the reasons why. And more than that, the minister is responsible for providing a written statement explaining the decision. I believe it's within 60 days of the decision being made public. And we're hundreds of days out from that now, and we still have no written decision on why that was made. One thing that we did hear from Goody Hutchings was that they had an obligation to NAFO, and that if they reopened a commercial fishery, well, then that's the obligation to NAFO. But what they're being disingenuous about is there was no reason to reopen the commercial fishery to begin with, and there was no precedent. There was not even any support from science to do this. So from our perspective, the only one who benefits from this decision are the corporate fleets.
To me, it's shocking that you've had such a terrible response from the Liberal government on such an important issue. You did talk about contract flipping and the detrimental effect this is having on unionized members and Unifor in particular. I'm wondering if you or Unifor has raised this issue with the Liberal government. They've been the government for almost 10 years, and I'm sure you've been advocating on this issue for a long time as well, because what you described is horrific, that someone would have to take a 30% pay cut in order to continue to have their job. And the government could have made a change on this. Have you pursued a change with this Liberal government on contract flipping? And what has been their response? Is it similar to the decision you've just talked about?
Well, unfortunately, when it comes to contract flipping and labor legislation, it's provincially set. So we have been provincially lobbying for changes to contract flipping legislation. It has been raised federally, and I think that federal support and coordination and best practice setting will be essential to help the provinces get in line as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have one final question. The Liberal member talked a lot about this alleged policy declaration from the Conservative Party. I think it's about 10 or 12 years old, by members that go to a policy convention that decide something. What's the bigger threat to your union and your workers? Is it this obscure section in a policy document, or the actual decision that the government has made with respect to the fishery?
It's definitely a combination of things. Resource management decisions affect our members the most, but a lot of policy and legislation needs to be looked at just to support unionization and unionized workers in all industries.
Can you give an example of how your union or other unions are more effective in promoting safety, particularly within your industry, than the corporate structure which risks taking over things out in Newfoundland?
Yes, thank you. So our union has been successful in establishing two provincially coordinated safety associations. So we were successful in establishing the Newfoundland and Labrador Fish Harvesting Safety Association. Commercial fish harvesters have the most dangerous job in the world. A number of members lose their lives every single year. So our union, taking a step in establishing this, has done a lot to improve fish harvesting safety. And also on the processing side, we've been successful in getting a subcommittee for processing plant workers, because people in different sectors face different obstacles to safety and different issues. And there are a lot of unique health and safety challenges with people who work in fish processing, things like crab asthma, occupational disease, injuries, ammonia leaks. So there's a lot of things that need to be talked about that are hidden by companies in the interest of profits.
I want to thank you so much for coming, and hopefully the government will finally listen to your pleas on these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Seebeck. Mr. Collins for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just start by correcting the record. My friend and colleague, the policy that he referenced wasn't 12 years old. It was actually from the Conservative playbook in 2023. So if I could... Yeah. Okay.
Send it to you. The whole document is updated in 2023 from policies from 20 years ago.
Seebeck, you don't have the floor. Nobody interrupted you when you did. Mr. Collins?
You got to...
Mr. Chair, can I still have the floor?
Yes, you do. And Mr. Seebeck, guard your comments. Mr. Collins?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And thank you for both of the witnesses for attending today on this very important study. Mr. Harvey, maybe I can start with you because you represent the public service. When I was first elected to Hamilton City Council in 1995, Premier Harris of the day had his common sense conservative, his common sense revolution playbook that targeted public sector employees. And at the time, thousands of public sector unionized employees took to the streets because they were a target of government policies in terms of trying to erode some of the gains that unionized members here in the province of Ontario had made over a course of decades. And I watched with interest, certainly coming from the city of Hamilton, I know the importance of unions and what they do on behalf of their membership over a period of time and how hard they fight to secure some of the benefits and the gains that their members in some cases have fought decades for. So I watched with interest when common sense conservatives targeted unionized employees in the 90s. And of course, that was overturned with a Liberal government, and those policies reversed, thankfully. And then I watched, again, still as a city councillor, with Prime Minister Harper and two pieces of legislation that targeted, again, unionized employees with Bills 377 and 525. And it wasn't too long ago here in my province that Conservative Premier Ford targeted nurses and educators in this province with his bill that was challenged in the courts. And it was a bill where that he passed that undermined the collective bargaining process in terms of imposing 1% caps on teachers and nurses and other public sector employees for a period of 3 years. And of course, the courts shot that down, thankfully, and reversed that legislation. And the province is now in the process of paying tens of millions, if not billions of dollars for that mistake. I give you those as instances of periods of time where governments, they all seem to come from the same party, attack and demonize unionized workers in terms of trying to paint a picture of them to the public that they're expensive, that they stand in the way of progress, that there is no benefit for the rights that they've secured. And, you know, the legislation, whether I go back to Premier Harris or whether I go to Premier Ford or I go to Prime Minister Harper, the playbook from common sense conservatives seems to be the same. And that is to try to chip away and erode the benefits and the pay packages that have been secured over a period of decades by union membership and by union leadership over that same period. And so can I ask you, when legislation is presented and those public debates happen and you are demonized or your members are demonized by a level of government, what does that do to morale? What does that do to the leaders who have fought very hard for these benefits? And I know I've given you some examples that are out of province, but I think over the years you've probably followed some of these same stories.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Collins, for your question. I'm going to answer indirectly. One of my activities in the Quebec Union is to promote the participation of the public sector in Quebec. So I was at the table where negotiations for health workers were secured. I can tell you that when you are bargaining, no matter what the color of the group, it always costs too much in the eyes of the government. It doesn't matter what you're asking for. And we represent 60% of public expenditures, which is not surprising given the fact that government services are services, not products. And we represent, therefore, the largest share of expenditures for a government. But it's always difficult for our members when this type of statement is made. We have jobs, care jobs. These are often vocations that are not recognized for their proper value. And it's difficult, not necessarily when the attacks come through the bargaining system, and you're asking for a wage increase, but when the actual structure of bargaining, the bargaining structure itself is being attacked, and the motives of the people who are involved are being attacked. And that is very painful for the members of the union and for the union itself. In terms of the union's abilities to represent its members, and that does become more complicated. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Madame Chabot, pour 2 minutes.
Madame Chabot, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. I always speak too much, but there are examples in the federal government that certainly should be corrected. When you look at contract flipping, like you talked about, that is something that's happening with Air Canada right now. They are contracting out, then rehiring the same people to pay them $10 an hour less. And I say that the laws should be changed. And in terms of telecommunications, the telecoms, the representation of unions is certainly being diminished because there are good jobs in Canada and elsewhere. If they can't, they will move on to Videotron or somewhere else. So these are matters that should be looked at, should be resolved for union workers. Fisheries are unionized, and I just can't imagine what the situation would be if that weren't the case. Mr. Harvey, I listened to you. It's especially important what you have said for teachers, for those who are working as support workers in the home. Is there a difference between those who are unionized and those who are not? Well, yes. Those people who are teachers and care workers, child care workers in the home, that has made a difference over a period of 20 years. Their salaries have almost doubled, given the bargaining rounds at the table. And there is a better understanding of the costs of childcare and what is involved in childcare. There is a basic wage that is set for workers in Quebec in those areas. We see in the collective agreements that there are things that apply directly to the workers because they are organized. But the teachers is particularly in untraditional areas is of particular interest. Thank you, Ms. Chabot. Mr. Harvey, thank you.
Conclude the questioning.
And what fantastic witnesses today, so much insight. So I just want to thank them so much. And I also wanted to just echo what Madame Chabot was saying, like fantastic comments that Madame Chabot made about contract flipping. So, Mr. Chair, we heard today in committee that of the detrimental impact that contract flipping has on workers, and we must, as parliamentarians, do what we can to protect workers from this. And this committee can address a current loophole in the Labour Code right now in relation to contract flipping for airport workers. There is a Unifor campaign called Air Transportation Worker Charter of Rights. They have 9 tangible asks. One is protection from contracting out. So I have a motion, Mr. Chair, in relation to the testimony today, that in the opinion of the committee, the Canadian Labour Code be amended to close a loophole that annuls existing labour contracts or collective agreements when there is a change of employer for subcontractors working at Canadian airports, by implementing amendments outlined in NDP Private Members Bill C-330, titled An Act to Amend the Canada Labour Code, Successor Rights and Obligations Airports, and that the committee report this to the House. And the clerk has that in both official languages to send out to the committee.
Thank you, Madame Zarrillo. You do?
I do have it.
You have it? But we were not given notice. It's time. Madame Zarrillo, we'll deal with this at a subsequent meeting because we are about out of time and it wasn't noticed. So,
just, Mr. Chair, it didn't have to be on notice. It relates to the discussion
yes,
today.
That's your interpretation. I'll get guidance.
It's not my interpretation. That's the rules.
Thank you. That concludes your time. We haven't dealt with the motion that you put forward. We'll get it. 2 items I need direction on. You all had the draft news release.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. There's a motion on the floor.
No, I didn't.
Thank you.
Madame Zarrillo, and it wasn't dealt with. So with that, the time has gone by, so the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, and thank you, witnesses, for appearing. Adjourned.